Okay, hello everyone. Just giving people time to log in, folks. I'm gonna give them 1 more minute and then we can get cracking.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we're recording. It usually brings up a red dot to indicate it's recording. And I keep pressing start recording, but I don't see any change.
Is that something I can do, or is that? I don't see anyone.
So, yeah. Let me stop transcription just to see what will. There we go. Okay. I think it should be doing it now. Okay, well, hopefully it is recording. If not, those of you that are here are going to be the lucky ones, and other people are going to be jealous. But anyway, so hello everyone. I'm Thanos Vostanis. I am the one of the lecturers here at the Tizard Center at the University of Kent, where we offer master courses in applied behavior analysis and positive behavior support, both campus-based and distance learning, and relevant to those of you pursuing BACB certification through the ABAI route, or those of you who want to become UKBA Certs, which is the new term we use in England for certified behavior analysts. This is our monthly behavioral talk, which, as you all know, aims to disseminate good practice in our world. Tizard Center generally specializes in IDD, and I will be putting some information in the chat about our work. I just want to highlight that we also have the Tizard Learning Disability Review, which is our peer-reviewed journal focusing on individuals with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. That is practitioner-focused, and that's why I keep encouraging you to submit your work for review, for peer review to our journal, because it might lead to a nice publication that will interest colleagues here in the UK and more broadly around the globe. Now, every year, I aim for a giant of our field to come to the talk and present. So I've brought to you Carl Binder, I've brought to you Joe Lang, I've brought to you Dave Palmer. Here you go, I bring to you today Dr. Hank Schlinger, which is another giant of our field that has very kindly agreed to present to us today. So for those of you claiming a CU, keep in mind that I will deliver 3 keywords while Hank is presenting. I'll be interrupting him. Make sure you gather those keywords, and at the end of the session, monitor your chat. I'm going to put a link that will lead you to a form. You can add your details in that form plus the keywords, and I will prepare the CEU for you. Now, don't email me asking where your CEUs are. I have 45 days to do so. So let me be, and I will sort them out, I promise. Don't clog my email box. All right, folks? So without further ado, Dr. Schlinger, thank you very much for joining us today. Could I start by asking you to talk to us about your current work, and then take it away, and I'll be monitoring the chat for you, and I'll be in the background.
Okay. Well, thank you, Thanos, for inviting me. I'm honored. I would rather, of course, be doing it live in England, but Southern California is okay. my current work is actually my talk today. This talk is derived or based on a manuscript that I'm happy to say I just learned yesterday was accepted by the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. And it was co-authored by my friend and colleague, Eb Blakely. You can see we have a lot in common physically as well as intellectually. We worked on this manuscript for more than a year and a half. Hopefully you'll see that as I go through my talk today, you'll see why it might be somewhat controversial, which is why I think it took so long for the manuscript to be accepted. But that is that's what I'm currently doing right now. So you can see the title of the talk is A Mediational Theory of Equivalence Relations. The actual manuscript that we got accepted is A Mediational Theory of Equivalence Relations and Transformation of Function. The original manuscript had an entire section on verbal relations, but we took that out in the process of review, and we will probably draft a separate manuscript on verbal relations, a mediational theory of verbal relations, which we will hopefully write up as soon as possible and submit to another journal. In any case, here is an outline of what I'm going to do today. So first, I'm going to just provide a brief introduction, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about theory and behavior analysis, because the title of the talk is a mediational theory, and the word theory gets thrown around a lot, and so I want to talk about what theory is in behavior analysis. And then I'll jump right into talking about equivalence relations, and I'll begin with Sidman's 1971 demonstration, and then offer some explanations, both by him and then by Horn and Lowe. And then I'll just briefly touch on the relationship between relational frame theory and equivalence. And then I'll jump into the meat of things by talking about a mediational theory of equivalence in humans, and then briefly a mediational theory of equivalence in non-humans. And then I'll follow that with some conclusions and implications. I realize that most people probably joining us today are practitioners. This is a theoretical talk, but it has, I think, immediate practical applications. I'll talk about a few of those at the end, but I hope that as I go through the talk, that many of you will be able to see what those implications for practice are as we go through. So, over the past 40 or 50 years, there's been an explosion of research on what people call derived or emergent relations. Now, you might say, Schlinger, how can it be an explosion if it's over 50 years? But if you look at the actual number of articles and books and book chapters written on derived relations, at least in geological time, it looks like an explosion, okay? There's been a lot. And if you look at the journals, our behavioral journals, almost every issue of every behavioral journal I look at has some articles still on equivalence or relational frame theory or naming. Now, there have been theories that have been proposed to account for these emergent or derived relations, and each theory has its own associated nomenclature or jargon. So, for example, Sidman's stimulus equivalence theory talks about reflexivity, symmetry, transitivity, and actually equivalence. Relational frame theory has terms such as arbitrarily applicable responding, mutual entailment, combinatorial entailment, framing relationally, etc. And Horn and Lowe's naming hypothesis talks about naming or bidirectional naming. Now, with the exception of the Horn and Lowe hypothesis, the problems that I see or that we see are that with all of these theories, behavioral mechanisms are not really identified. And so that's the purpose of the talk today, is really to try and identify what are the behavioral mechanisms that generate these so-called derived or emergent relations. And in his review of the RFT book, Bill McIlvaine really said it quite succinctly. He said, any theory must be reconciled with the basic behavioral processes that are at the core of the experimental analysis of behavior. And that's what we have done in our article, and that's what I propose to do today, to try to reconcile all of this information about equivalence in terms of the basic behavioral processes. So the solution that I'm going to propose is really just a behavior analytic theory of what people call derived or emergent relations. We're calling it a mediational theory, and you'll see why in a little while, but it's really a behavior analytic theory. And when I say that, what I mean is that the explanation that I'm going to offer, the theory, is based only on behaviors, stimuli, and consequences that are present in matching to sample procedures. And our claim is that whether you observe the behaviors or not, and when they're not observed, actually Sidman called them undefined, which I'll mention in a little while, but whether you observe the mediating behaviors or not, behaviors that occur at the time of reinforcement mediate subsequent behavioral relations referred to as derived or emergent. And notice I have derived or emergent in quotation marks, and you'll see why later. So let's just talk briefly about what we mean by theory in behavior analysis or behavior analytic theory. Behavior analytic theory incorporates laws and principles that have been induced from the experimental analysis of behavior. And the critical word there is an induced. All of the theories in the natural sciences are theories that have been induced from basic research. They don't start off with the theory and then look for research to corroborate it. That would be the hypothetical deductive model. So in behavior analysis, the theory is based on the discovery of a functional analytic unit. And you all know that as the four-term contingency, right? A motivating operation, discriminative stimulus, response, and consequences, or consequence. For Skinner, the basic datum in our field is the probability that a response of a given form will occur at a given time. And when he says a given time, of course, what he means is under a given set of circumstances, which for us would be, motivating operations and discriminative stimuli. And the basic goals of our field of behavior analysis or behavior analytic theory are prediction and control. Now, I know some people nowadays like to use the phrase prediction and influence. I'm not a big fan of that. However, if you're talking to non-behavior analysts or if you're talking to family members or parents, and you want to talk about the goals of our science, then I'm fine with using the word influence. I understand the word control has negative connotations and may put people off. But when you're talking amongst ourselves, when we're talking amongst ourselves and we're talking about the science, our goals are prediction and control, right? You can predict the probability that a response of a given form will occur at a given time. And you can only do that if you control your variables in an experimental setting or a functional analysis. Now, more generally, scientific theories consist of explanatory statements, or in the mathematical sciences, equations that fit the evidence. And as you all know, they're provisional, right? They're not absolute. They represent the best available view of reality, at least until some conflicting data or a better explanation comes along. As McCain and Siegel said, the purpose of a theory in science is to describe and explain observable and observed events, and to predict what will be observed under certain specified conditions. And I have observable and observed highlighted. The reason is because we all deal with observed behavior. That's behavior that can be observed and measured. But observable means behavior that can be potentially observed. And that, of course, is a function of the technology that we have that enables us to observe behavior. So observed behavior and behavior that could be potentially observed. And I just like this quote from Skinner, 1947. A theory has nothing to do with the presence or absence of experimental confirmation. Facts and theories do not stand in opposition to each other. The relation, rather, is this. Theories are based upon facts. They are statements about organization of facts. So that's where the word induced comes in, right? The theory is induced from the experimental facts. The atomic theory, the kinetic theory of gases, the theory of evolution, and the theory of the gene are examples of reputable and useful scientific theories. They are all statements about facts, and with proper operational care, they need be nothing more than that. But they have a generality which transcends particular facts and gives them a wider usefulness. Every science eventually reaches the stage of theory in this sense. I believe our science has reached that stage, maybe not as in a sophisticated manner as the other natural sciences, but sufficient enough to be able to provide explanations of behavior. Now, a mediational theory, the one I'm going to propose today, explains existing data from matching to sample experiments on equivalence. It makes specific predictions that can be tested. Thus, the theory can be falsified if that's your cup of tea. But what does it mean to falsify a theory? What I'm going to propose today, and what we proposed in our article, is that a mediational theory explains most, if not all, of the results from matching to sample experiments with humans and non-humans. Now, it's possible that there may be a particular experimental preparation or methodology that can show matching to sample or equivalence, if you will, in the absence of mediating behavior. That wouldn't falsify the whole theory, but what it would do is it would set limits on the theory, okay? So that's kind of what we mean by falsify. So let's talk about equivalence relations. Now I'm going to try to keep it very simple because I don't really understand it much more beyond the simple stuff anyway. But here's a three-member equivalence class with an auditory sample stimulus. So if you say cat, or if you say find cat, and you then reinforce someone for selecting a picture of a cat out of an array, okay? So that's training A to B. And then you say cat or find cat, and you reinforce someone for selecting the printed word cat out of an array of other words. So in this case, you've trained A to B and A to C. Now, according to lore in the field, once you do that, you get 4 derived relations. So you train 2, you get 4. Sometimes they talk about getting them for free. So you've trained A to B, but as a result of that, it is sometimes claimed that now the person can see the cat and they can say cat. That is, they can tact cat. Likewise, you've trained them to select the printed word cat when they hear the word cat. And as a result, they can now see the printed word cat and they can say cat. That would be an example in Skinner's nomenclature of a textual response. And perhaps more interesting is they can now select a picture of a cat when they see the printed word and vice versa. That would be called transitivity. Now, if this is true, and many people have thought it has been for the last 50 years, then it's pretty amazing. And it has all kinds of incredible implications that you only teach a couple of relations and you get a bunch for free. That's got to be intoxicating for anybody who's a teacher or a practitioner. Here's another diagram of this. This was provided by Mark Sundberg. And this just shows the same 3-member equivalence class, but it shows it with all the theoretical terms associated with those theories I mentioned. So you have symmetry, transitivity, C-bin, V-bin, mutual entailment, combinatorial entailment, along with Skinner's nomenclature, tact, textual, listener behavior, etc. So that's just a really brief introduction just to a very simple 3-member equivalence class with an auditory stimulus. Let's talk about what Sidman did in 1971. Now, Sidman's participant was an intellectually disabled teenager. I think he was about 17 or 18. And Sidman reports that this individual could already select pictures when hearing their name. So you say cat, the individual could already select a picture of a cat out of an array. And interestingly, the individual could already tact the pictures. So if you show them a picture of a cat, they could say cat, okay? So this was already in this individual's repertoire. What Sidman trained was hearing the word cat or find cat or something like that, trained the individual to select the printed word, okay? So that was the only training that was involved. As a result, Sidman demonstrated 2 relations that he called, well, he didn't call them derived, but we will call them derived. So as a result of training this relation, A to C, the individual was now able to see the printed word cat and say cat, and they were also able to select a picture of a cat when they saw the printed word. two relations that were not directly trained. Well, I should say not explicitly trained. So what was Sidman's explanation? First of all, he dismissed the role of auditory words, or what he called the auditory channel. He noted that, quote, the subject did not name the words or pictures aloud, and that might be critical, during the reading comprehension tests, and that the only auditory stimuli were the words spoken to him in previous tests and teaching sessions. Sidman goes on to say, matching auditory words to pictures, that's the AB relation, and to printed words, the AC relation, are sufficient prerequisites for the emergence of both types of stimulus-response relations, BA-CA, which he ultimately called symmetry. Reading comprehension, CB, and oral reading, CA. Got a poltergeist in my computer here. Now, in 1990, so this was about 11 years after he published his first experiment, Sidman wrote a chapter and he called it Equivalence Relations, Where Do They Come From? So this seems like the important question to ask, right? We want to know, how do these so-called derived relations, how do they come about? That should be the question everyone should ask. At that time, Sidman called it a fundamental and still unresolved problem, okay? And then he said, perhaps the question of whether verbal behavior via naming rules or some other route is necessary for equivalence will never be answered to anyone's satisfaction. In other words, Sidman was trying to deal with the possibility that the individual engages in some verbal mediating behavior, okay? And so he says, you know, perhaps it'll never be answered. It may not be possible to determine which is cause and which is effect. In other words, does verbally mediating the relations cause these so-called derived relations, or does the training, the equivalence training, cause you to then talk about it? The question of verbal behavior's primacy would be settled with a negative answer, that is, it would not be necessary, if equivalence relations could be demonstrated unequivocally with non-humans. Now, despite and Sidman himself, along with some colleagues, actually tried to teach equivalence relations to some primates, I believe monkeys and baboons, and they failed. That was in 1982. So despite that, Sidman, now in 2000, was convinced that equivalence had been demonstrated in a variety of non-humans. Others had reported equivalence in non-humans, despite Sidman's own failed attempt. And of course, this is what he was looking for, because this allowed him to conclude that verbal behavior was not necessary to demonstrate equivalence. Now, think about the implications of that. That means you should be able to demonstrate equivalence in nonverbal humans, or perhaps in pre-verbal infants, or perhaps in any nonverbal, a non-human organism. Sidman said equivalence relations are a direct outcome of reinforcement contingencies and consist of ordered pairs of all positive elements that participate in the contingency. He called them unanalyzed primitives, like reinforcement and discrimination. So for Sidman, equivalence was a basic principle like reinforcement and discrimination. That is, it couldn't be analyzed any further than that. Now, I'm a skeptic, so whenever someone says something, I always, put on my skeptic hat. And it is possible to analyze reinforcement below the level of reinforcement, right? You can ask, why does a certain event function as reinforcement? You can ask, how does reinforcement work? Rather than just saying it works. So I'm not sure that I would call reinforcement or discrimination an unanalyzed primitive, but I know what Sidman meant. Now, this is important for, yes.
Sorry, just to deliver the first keyword. Folks, for those of you who are claiming a CU, the first keyword is theory. I repeat, the first keyword for your CU is theory. Thanks, Hank.
You're welcome. Okay. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is important for the analysis I'm going to propose today. In Sidman's explanation, he noted that undefined, uncontrolled elements may enter into the contingency. And I want to just pause for a moment because this is a critical and crucial fact that every practitioner should know as well. So experimenters should know this and practitioners should know this. Just because you define what you think is an SD for a response, and just because you define what you think the response is, and just because you define what the reinforcer is, that doesn't mean that there aren't other uncontrolled elements in your setting, whether you're an experimenter or a practitioner. Other SDs that you're not aware of that are controlling other responses in the person you're working with that you're not aware of, and other possible reinforcers, right? And sometimes when what you're doing doesn't work, then you have to analyze whether there may be some competing events, competing SDs, competing reinforcers, etc. Sidman said the subject may do other things instead of the defined response. The subject's responses may produce undefined consequences. Also, undefined discriminative and conditional stimuli may control what the subject does. This is a critical quote from Sidman, which is really at the heart of the analysis that we're going to present today. So here's what it would mean, I think, to talk about undefined responses and reinforcers. So here's our basic 3-member equivalence class that I put up before. So the subject hears cat, and when they do that, you reinforce them for selecting the picture of a cat. But it's possible that if the subject is verbal, and it's quite clear that the individual that Sidman studied in 71 was verbal, it's possible that that person might echo cat either overtly or covertly. If they echo it overtly, you might just disregard it because that's not part of what you're looking for, right? But they could echo it covertly. And if they echo it covertly or overtly, it's an undefined response, right? It's not the response that the experimenter is defining. The response they're defining is the selection response. And if they echo cat when they hear it, and that verbal response is present when they're reinforced for selecting the picture of a cat, then the reinforcement for selecting the picture also reinforces the echoic response. That would be an undefined reinforcer. And the same would happen here, right? If there are in fact undefined responses and reinforcers, that's what it would look like. And by the way, this is going to look a lot like what I'm going to propose and what Horn and Lowe proposed back in 1996. Okay, briefly, just the relationship between RFT and equivalence. Relational frame theorists claimed that equivalence is just one instance of what they call higher order responding, which they call arbitrarily applicable relational responding. It's kind of a mouthful if you say it quickly. According to Hayes, symmetry is viewed as fundamental to stimulus equivalence because mutual entailment is the basis for the other aspects of relational responding, combinatorial entailment, and transfer of function. Hayes and Wilson said stimulus equivalence is a jumping off point for RFT. And finally, Hayes said equivalence is just the beginning. So for the relational frame theorists, equivalence is just one part of what they consider a broader theory of what they call relational framing. Okay, so I've talked about two of the so-called theories, right? One was Sidman's equivalence theory, and the second one was the relational framing. And now I want to talk briefly about naming hypothesis, or the naming account of Horn and Lowe. In their 1996 article, which is almost a short book, it was a very long article, they said naming is a circular relation that includes, for example, seeing an object, like a picture of a car, saying car, hearing your own utterance car, and then having that own utterance function as an SD for either looking at or otherwise attending to the object. So you have kind of a speaker-listener relation going on within the same individual. Now, lately, let me see, make sure. Lately, others have referred to naming as bidirectional naming. And so according to Miguel, bidirectional naming is a higher order operant that involves a bidirectional relation between speaker and listener behaviors. And I have things highlighted for obvious reasons. Well, maybe not obvious, I'll explain them. The teaching of one of these components suffices to establish both. Now, he doesn't come out and say it here, but this implies a derived relation, right? You teach one and you get the other one for free, right? For example, if you learn to say cow in the presence of a picture of a cow, that's a tact. That establishes the selection of the picture when hearing the word cow. So for example, you teach someone to say cow when they see the picture, and now you say cow and they can select the picture of the cow. But you didn't train them to do that, right? You just trained them to tact cow. And once again, I've highlighted with no direct training. So even though bidirectional naming or the naming account is pretty close to a mediational theory, it still assumes some kind of derived relations. Now, when we were drafting our manuscript, we were confused about what the word higher order operant was. I've never been sure what a higher order operant is. I know what an operant is. And so we found this definition by Catania. A higher order operand is an operant class that includes within it other classes that themselves can function as operands. Contingencies operate differently on the higher order class than on the classes that are its components. A higher order class may also be called a generalized class. Well, I understand that because it's in English, but I'm still not quite sure how contingencies can operate different on the higher order class than on its components, but I'll leave that for another time. According to Pettis-Daughter, in modern behavior analysis, the term bidirectional naming is increasingly used to describe covariation in listener and speaker relations, like the example of cow I just gave, that involve the same spoken words and objects, such that reinforcement of one also affects the other, right? So there you have the implication of derived relation again, or the modeling of a tact results in the emergence of both, right? So you see the word emergence, right? And you see, this notion that regardless of the theory, there's still this notion that relations emerge or are derived. And this is from Greer and Ross, the capacity about bidirectional naming, the capacity to acquire a tact and a listener response by simply hearing another tact a stimulus, right? So you hear someone tact a stimulus and now you're able to do it. That's a derived relation. You weren't explicitly trained to do that, or were you? And here's a quote by Miguel about bidirectional naming. The acquisition of echoic and listener behaviors serves as the ideal condition for the development of tacts. When parents interact with their child by showing and tacting an object, for example, where's the doll, or look at the doll, that would be listener behavior, the child may attempt to repeat what they are saying, doll, while looking at the doll or interacting with the object. The reinforcer, in the form of acknowledgement, attention, praise, etc., delivered contingent upon the listener behavior, that is, looking at the doll or pointing to it or something, will also serve to strengthen the child's vocal echoic attempts in the presence of the object, right? So this goes back to the undefined responses and reinforcers that I talked about that Sidman mentioned. This eventually leads to a transfer of stimulus control, whereby the object exerts nonverbal discriminative control over the specific vocal topography, doll, that would be a tact. This is when the child learns to name the object. And then I have this highlighted. When she sees the object again, the doll, it can evoke the tact, saying doll, which can in turn evoke conventional listener behavior, looking at or playing with the doll. Now, by the way, this description by Miguel is a perfect description of mediating behavior, which is why the Horn and Low account is a mediational account. The only problem with these accounts is that they still suggest derived relations. The account that I'm going to propose today, the theory, is going to suggest that there are no derived relations. Now, here is Horn and Low's naming account of Sidman's experiment that I mentioned a little while ago. When the subject hears the auditory stimulus cat, she echoes it, saying cat, in the presence of the corresponding visual comparison that is either the picture of the cat or the printed word cat. And I have this highlighted, and a common name is thereby established. So what's the common name? Well, the common name is cat. During subsequent visual test trials, seeing either the picture of the cat or the printed word cat as the sample evokes saying cat. And hearing themselves say cat now occasions or evokes selecting either the corresponding picture or the printed word, whichever is available as a comparison. Here's what it looks like. So here's our three-term equivalence class. So you hear cat, you're reinforced for selecting the picture of the cat. You hear cat, you're also reinforced for selecting the printed word cat. Now, what do Horn and Lowe mean by a common name? Well, if as a result of that, you're able to see the picture and say cat, or look at the printed word and say cat, the common name is cat. It sounds the same, whether you're looking at the picture or the printed word. I'll come back and talk about that in a second. So here's Horn and Lowe's naming account of what we just talked about. So as a result of that training, okay, and there's the symmetry or the common name, you see the picture of a cat, you say cat, you tact cat. You hear yourself tact cat, which functions as an SD for selecting the printed word cat, okay? Or vice versa, you see the printed word cat, you say cat. Like here, you hear yourself say cat, and just like over here, that functions as an SD to select the printed, the picture of the cat. So both of these operate in the same way, just different comparison stimuli, different SDs. And so that's why it's called bidirectional naming. However, there are a few problems with Horn and Lowe's analysis. Even though for us, the Horn and Lowe analysis was almost, you know, it's almost at the point where it would be a true mediational analysis. The first problem is that they really didn't identify a mechanism for how the common name is established, simply as a function of hearing the auditory stimulus in the presence of the corresponding visual comparisons. They just said a common name is thereby established. Well, how is that? How does that work? Actually, if we go back to this quote by Miguel, where is that quote? He actually gives us the answer, okay? So what does a common name mean? Well, it's a formal account, right? It's just you hear yourself say cat to the picture, and that sounds like when you hear yourself say cat to the printed word. The problem is those are two different functional relations. One's a tact, the other's a textual relation. The third problem with Horn and Lowe's analysis is that they suggested that in later visual-to-visual test trials, right, transitivity, the selection of the comparison is evoked by the response product of the individual saying cat to the other comparison. So selecting the printed word cat is evoked by hearing yourself say cat to the picture, okay? And this one is the same. And that leads me to a mediational theory of equivalence in humans. So here are the questions we should ask. Number one, what happens at the moment of reinforcement? And by the way, this is a question that practitioners should ask as well. When you deliver what you think is a reinforcer, you should ask yourself, what behaviors is the person I'm working with, what behaviors are they engaging in at the moment of reinforcement? And you know why you should ask that, right? Because even if they're engaging in the response that you're looking for, the defined response, they may be engaging in some other behaviors at the same time, and those might be reinforced too. What behaviors does the sample stimulus evoke in a matching to sample procedure? And again, what does the organism do? This is the main question you ask all the time, right? This is the answer to your behavioral definition, right? What's the organism doing? What's the child doing? What's the person doing? Okay, so let's look at a mediational theory of matching to sample with an auditory sample stimulus like I've been talking about. You hear cat, or you hear someone say find cat. You select the picture of a cat out of an array of pictures, and you're reinforced for doing so. Likewise, selecting the printed word cat is reinforced out of an array when they hear the word cat. So you train AB, you train AC. Here's our mediational theory, and it's very much like what Miguel described. So let me just take you through this. So here's what's trained, right? You train A to B, right? You hear the word cat, you're trained to reinforce, or you're reinforced for selecting the picture of a cat. So here's how we think it works. And by the way, this is the Horn and Low analysis. This is the Miguel analysis. So someone says cat or find cat. That evokes cat as an echoic response. That echoic response, cat, occurs in the presence of the picture when you're reinforced for selecting the picture. So two things are reinforced here, according to this theory. One response that's reinforced is selecting the picture of the cat in the presence of the printed word. But the second relation that's reinforced is saying cat when you hear cat. Okay? Now, if that's true, then saying cat when you hear it, saying cat when you see the picture, which Sidman would call symmetry, was directly trained. It wasn't derived or emerged, it was directly trained. It was not explicitly trained. I make a distinction between direct training and explicit training. Explicit training is what the researcher or practitioner intends to do. And in this case, the only explicit training is training the individual to select the picture of the cat when they hear the sound of the word cat. But if the individual echoes cat and they're echoing it while they're selecting the picture and being reinforced, well, that's direct training, but that's not explicit training. Here's the other one, which operates the same way. This is A to C. You hear the word cat and you're reinforced for selecting the printed word. So someone says cat or find cat, you say cat as an echoic response. If you're echoing cat, at the same time you're reinforced for selecting the printed word cat, well, you're now able then to see the printed word and say cat. Remember that up until now, or up until 1996, when Horn and Low published their article, people assumed that that was a derived relation. It was an untaught relation. But according to a mediational theory, if the printed word cat now evokes saying cat, that was directly trained. Not explicitly trained, because that's not what the researcher intended to train. So our argument is symmetry is directly trained, not explicitly trained. I'm going to keep making that distinction for you, okay? So here's what you train that's defined, right? You train selecting the picture of the cat when you hear the word cat, and you train selecting the printed word cat when you hear the word cat. Those are the defined relations by the experimenter. But if the individual echoes cat in both of these situations when they hear the word cat, and they're echoing cat when they're reinforced for selecting the picture or the printed word, well, then these are trained too, aren't they? They're just the undefined relations. That's not what the experimenter intended to do. But I hope you all understand the importance of this, because it means that the symmetrical relation, the C to A or the B to A, is directly trained. It's not derived. It's not emergent. They're directly trained. So,
Hank,
let me talk
before you move on, let me just, so I don't interrupt you later, let me deliver the second keyword. Folks, our second keyword for the CU is relation. I repeat, our second keyword for the CU is relation. Thanks, Hank.
Sure. Also, Thanos, is it okay if I go over a little bit in time?
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
I will deliver the last keyword at the 1 hour mark in case folks need to go for their CU, but I'm happy to stay a bit longer. No problem.
Okay. Yeah, I know we started after the time anyway. So in this mediational theory that I'm proposing, we can call the echoic response the mediating behavior, and the resulting tact or textual responses, the mediated behavior. But regardless of what we call them, it's important to understand it's the reinforcement that establishes these mediated relations. In a three-member equivalence procedure, there are at least three undefined responses, stimuli, and reinforcers, A, B, BA, etc. So what about transitivity? Well, here's our theory of transitivity. It's a little more complicated. Here we're testing BC, right? We've already trained AB and AC. We're testing BC. You see the picture of a cat and you select the printed word cat. And remember, heretofore, people have assumed that was derived. It wasn't directly trained. So here's the picture of a cat. A mediating theory proposes that when you see the picture, you tact cat, right? You've already been trained to do that, right? Not explicitly, but directly. So you say cat, and then you engage in self-echoic behavior. Cat, 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 right? You echo your own tact. And at the same time, you're presented with, in this case, three different printed words, right? Pig, dog, cat. If you are self-echoing cat while you see the printed word, well, you have no tendency to say cat when you see the printed word, right? You have no tendency to say cat when you see the printed word dog, but you do already have a tendency to say cat when you see the printed word cat, because that was already trained in your AC relation, right? So now you find yourself saying cat as an echoic, a self-echoic, and when you see the printed word, you find yourself saying cat as a textual response. Now, hopefully, some of you will be able to recognize that as an example of joint control. So you're saying, you see the picture of a cat, you say cat, 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 cat. You see the printed word, now you say cat for that reason too, and you're able to select the printed word. There it is, you point to it. The same thing happens in the CB relation, okay? You see the printed word, you've already been trained directly, not explicitly, to say cat when you see the printed word. So you say cat, which is a textual response in this case, and then you self-echo, cat, cat, cat. When you see the picture of a cat, you have a tendency to say cat already, you've been trained to do that. So now you find yourself saying cat as a self-echoic and as a tact. That's joint control, and you select the picture of a cat. So once again, I've shown you this already, right? These are undefined relations, but directly trained, right? Directly trained. And here's the transitivity, right? You see the printed word cat, and you're able to select the picture, right? Because selecting the picture is controlled or evoked jointly by your self-echo. Once you see the printed word, you say cat, cat, cat. You see the picture, you say cat. Now you're saying cat for two different reasons. So you're able to select the picture, and likewise the other direction. Notice these are also undefined relations, but they were directly trained. Just a brief thing about joint control. According to Lohengrin, joint control is a discrete event. It's a change in stimulus control that occurs when a response topography evoked by one stimulus, cat, 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 and preserved by rehearsal, that would be the self-echoic, is emitted under the additional and thus joint control of a second stimulus, a tact or a textual. So in stimulus equivalence, you say something like, find the cat. And the person says, they echo cat, and then they self-echo, cat, 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 echo, self-echo cat, while scanning an array. When they see the picture of the cat or the printed word, that evokes cat as either a tact or a textual. Now they're saying cat for two different reasons, as a self-echoic and as a tact or a textual. And that exerts control over the pointing of the correct comparison, either the tact or the textual, the picture or the printed word. So let me just offer a brief conclusion so far. Symmetry and transitivity are directly trained, not explicitly trained. The researcher did not set out to train symmetry and transitivity because that would defeat the whole edifice that we've all been raised on with respect to derived or emergent relations with respect to stimulus equivalence. But our argument, our theory is that they were directly trained. So something like this, you hear find cat or cat, that evokes echoing cat. That's the mediating behavior, the echo. Your echoing cat is a mediating behavior, and you might self-echo it. It is directly, though not explicitly, reinforced in the presence of the picture when the selection response occurs. It's an undefined response. Thus, a tact, which is the mediated behavior, is directly, though again, not explicitly trained. That's called symmetry. But you know, if it's directly trained, then maybe symmetry is not even the right word to use anymore, right? Because symmetry implies a derived untaught relation. Likewise, you hear cat or find cat, that evokes an echoic or self-echoic. That's the mediating behavior, which again is directly, though not explicitly, reinforced in the presence of the printed word when the selection response occurs. Thus, a textual response, which is the mediated behavior, is directly, though again, not explicitly reinforced. Again, equivalence researchers would call that symmetry. We may decide that it's not appropriate. Now, if you see the picture, that evokes cat as a tact. Even if it emerged, even if it wasn't directly trained, it still evokes the saying cat to the picture. But our argument is that you now engage in a self-echoic response. Remember, Lohengrin called it rehearsal, cat, cat, cat. While scanning the printed words, you see the printed word cat, that evokes cat as a textual response, and the control by both the self-echoic and the printed word jointly evokes or controls the selection response to the picture. And the same thing happens with the picture. So exact same process. So if the relations that we're talking about are directly, and you notice I keep making this distinction between direct and explicit. If these relations are directly, though not explicitly reinforced, then they're not derived. Now, a similar analysis also applies to visual stimuli and equivalence procedures. So here's an example. Thanos would recognize these. The rest of us maybe not so much. So here we have 3 Greek letters, and I only put the names of the letters for our own, purpose here. But if you wanted to train, you would probably not train them with the names, right? So you show this to someone, and then you reinforce them for selecting this out of an array. That's your A-B relation. And then you show this again, and you reinforce them for selecting this out of an array. That'd be your A-C relation. According to tradition, this is with a visual sample. According to tradition, then as a result of that, you're able to show them this, and they're able to select this. Likewise, you're able to show them this, and they're able to select this. That would be what people call symmetry. And according to tradition, they would be considered derived because you didn't explicitly train them. And likewise with transitivity. Okay? So in this case, when you see an abstract symbol, what we're arguing is that you tact it. And you might also engage in some intraverbal behavior about the symbol. So, for example, that one looks like an upside down Y. There's your upside down Y. That one looks like a candelabra. Okay, whoops, where are we here? There's your candelabra. By the way, this is my reinforcement history. You might tact them differently. Where am I here? And that one looks like an ampersand. Okay, those of you know what ampersand is, right? That's kind of like an and, right? Okay, see where I am here. I'm getting confused. Okay, and then the person might say, oh, the upside down Y goes with the candelabra, or the upside down Y also goes with the ampersand. Okay. So the tacts and intraverbals may be automatically reinforced, but even if they're not, they're incidentally reinforced by the researcher if reinforcement is provided for a correct matching response while the participant is tacting the abstract symbols. So if you see this and you go, oh, that looks like an upside down Y, at the same time you're reinforced for selecting that, well, guess what? Your tact and your intraverbal for this is reinforced. so that when you see this, you're able to go, oh yeah, the upside down Y. Likewise with the other relation. Every individual will tact the symbols differently, right? The tact is based on your own individual reinforcement history. It's like a projective test where vague stimuli like a Rorschach ink blot evoke responses that are currently strong in the repertoire. It doesn't matter whether your tact or interverbal is the same as someone else's. It only matters that yours occurs at the same time you're reinforced. Once the individual tacts the abstract symbols, well, they're no longer abstract for the individual, right? This is, right, the upside down Y is no longer an abstract symbol. It's now an upside down Y for you. Of course, you could teach, the researchers could teach you the names of the letters, right? And that would be explicit training. You could just say, this is lambda, this is psi, this is C. I think that's how you pronounce it. Is that right, Thanos? C, something like that. Yeah, you could just teach them the names of the letters, and then you've explicitly trained the text, right? And then there's your explicit training. There is a ton of evidence to support the role of tacting in the facilitation of equivalence relations. This is only a smattering of it. Here's a slide that I took from a talk that I attended, a relational frame theory talk I attended online, and I took a screenshot of this because it just illustrates what I'm trying to tell you. So in this case, they had an auditory sample, which was fa, and in the presence of that, they trained person to select B1. They didn't do this training, I don't think, or if they did, it was on a different slide. But then they also trained the person to select B1 when they saw C1. Okay, so you have A1 to B1 and C1 to B1. And then, of course, the dashed lines imply that just as a result of doing that, the person could see this and say fa, or they could see this, I'm sorry, and pick this. Now, when I looked at this, well, first of all, when I heard this, the first thing I did was echo it. I said fa. But even if I didn't echo it, when I looked at it, I said fa, right? Because I know how to put, a consonant vowel of consonant vowel consonant together, even if it's a nonsense syllable. When I looked at this, I said to myself, little triangles. And when I looked at this, I said sun or light. The first thing I did, that's why I took a screenshot of this. When I saw this, I said little ovals. When I saw this, I said June. When I saw this, I said fetus. Now that's my reinforcement history. You might call these something else, doesn't matter. My point is that these abstract stimuli evoked a tact on my part. And these auditory stimuli or textual stimuli evoked an echoic or a textual response. I was already prepared to mediate all of these relations by tacting or echoing them when I saw them. Only someone with no reinforcement history with respect to any of this would not be able to do that. And we would argue that they would not be able to show these so-called derived relations. Okay, I briefly want to talk about mediation in non-humans. Because remember, Sidman said, if it could be shown that non-humans could demonstrate equivalence, that for him, that would eliminate the possibility of verbal mediation, because non-humans are not verbal. But we're arguing that mediation does not only occur in verbal organisms, but it also occurs in non-verbal organisms. And there is a ton of research already to suggest that matching to sample performance in non-verbal organisms is mediated, going way back to 1959 with delayed matching to sample. I don't have time to talk about that, but if you're interested, I can alert you to the references or talk to you on email about it. Sometimes these researchers call it response coding. They say that the pigeon or the chimpanzee or the whale, they code the stimuli. Well, that's just another way of saying they tact it or engage in some kind of response to the sample stimulus. Equivalence in non-humans involves differential responding to the sample stimulus. So here are two, I'm only going to give you a very brief description of these. In 1987, McIntyre and all did a study with monkeys, where monkeys were trained to press and hold a button for 3.5 seconds in the presence of one color, say red, and in the presence of another color, say green, they were trained to press on an FR8 schedule. And then they showed as a result of that, they showed equivalence, they showed symmetry. But notice that the monkeys are engaging in differential responding to each sample stimulus. So in the presence of red, the monkey presses and holds the button down for 3.5 seconds. That's like calling red a 3.5-second button hold. And on green, they press and on an FR8 schedule. So they respond to red and green differentially, just like we do if we call red red and call green green. Manabe et al. Did an experiment with parakeets. They trained parakeets to make either a high or low frequency calls in the presence of a green or red sample. So for example, in the presence of green, the parakeet made a high frequency pitch call. In the presence of red, they made a low frequency call. Notice they're responding differently to the sample stimuli. They called it a color naming task. So for the parakeet, the name of green is high frequency call, and the name of red is a low frequency call. And they showed equivalence. There are other studies
Hank,
which are, yes.
Can I just interrupt you to deliver the last keyword?
Yes.
So the last keyword is equivalence. The last keyword is equivalence. I am posting in the chat, folks, the form for feedback. That's the first one. Check out your chat. And now I'm also posting the form for the 3 keywords. So you can add that. You can click on that link and it will take you to the form. Add those 3 keywords and your details, and I will prepare the CU certificate. If any of you will leave, click on those links so that you have them on your browser, because when Hank and I conclude the session, the chat will disappear. Okay? All right, Hank.
I have about 5 more minutes, so.
No, that's fine. Take your time. That's fine. I just
okay.
wanted to make sure that in case people needed their CU and they needed to go, they have access to it. Crack on.
Okay. So other studies have reported equivalence in non-humans, pigeons and sea lions, with no obvious mediating responding. However, that doesn't mean that there was no mediating responding. It just means that they didn't observe it, or perhaps it occurred and they didn't notice it. These researchers have said it's difficult to produce equivalence in non-humans, and such studies seem to require certain specialized conditions of training and testing. It's really difficult to show equivalence in non-humans. It's very easy in verbal humans. It's not very easy in non-verbal organisms. The number of non-human subjects that have been reported to show equivalence has been extremely small. So it's not robust in non-humans. So now, you know, Sidman talked about stimulus equivalence, but perhaps a better term is functional equivalence. Stimulus equivalence involves Sidman's terms, right? Reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity, which imply derived or emergent relations. But functional equivalence only requires a demonstration that 2 or more stimuli control the same behavior. Actually, this is an incorrect reference. It should be de Rose. I'm sorry about that. For our purposes, it doesn't matter whether you talk about stimulus or functional equivalence, because a mediational theory explains the results of studies from both perspectives. The implication is no equivalence relations are derived. This is an interesting couple of quotes from the Manabe study with parakeets. The researchers said, what we really need is some idea of the learning processes that bring about the quote unquote spontaneous matching of call type and comparison stimulus. Are the relations we found truly emergent? Or can they perhaps be reduced to 1 or more familiar conditioning processes? And did we nevertheless train them in an indirect way? So way back in 1995, they've already speculated that perhaps these relations are mediated. Saunders questioned whether response mediation that has been observed in non-humans plays a role in human equivalence class formation. But to us, it seems more obvious that all equivalence class formation in humans is mediated, and some or most of it in non-humans is. Maybe not all, it's hard to say. Okay, so what are the conclusions? Number 1, the evidence strongly suggests that when auditory verbal stimuli are used, participants' echoic and then most likely self-echoic and intraverbal behaviors mediate the so-called derived relations. Number two, when visual stimuli are used, tacts and intraverbals mediate the resulting relations. Number three, we're always talking to ourselves. We're always problem solving. You may not be aware of it much of the time, but you're always talking to yourself. You're always problem solving. You're always engaging in intraverbal behavior. The expression, the rat or the person is always right, is apropos because individuals are doing exactly what they should be doing given the circumstances. And what that is, they're behaving at the moment reinforcement is delivered, whether you observe the behavior or not. In the above equivalent scenarios, the participants are doing more than what the researchers observe, which is selecting pictures or printed words in the presence of auditory or visual stimuli. As Sidman said, the subject may do other things, undefined responses. There is a lot of research strongly suggesting that self-talk is occurring and is directly related to the outcomes. Results from matching sample and similar procedures that produce equivalence in humans and non-humans can be explained parsimoniously by a mediational process in which non-target stimulus control relations, which may or may not be observed, are trained at the time of reinforcement. I've already told you the distinction between directly trained and explicitly trained. If there are no derived relations, whoops, I gotta do something here. Oh my God, what happened? Hold on, I'm sorry. I've got a little problem here, okay. If there are no derived relations, then our theories of
You're
derived
not
relations.
sharing your screen at the moment, Hank.
Oh, no?
You would need to just screen share again. It probably just the screen sharing stopped for whatever reason.
Okay.
Just find your PowerPoint window and share it again.
All right, I can't do it from PowerPoint. Oh, can I do it from PowerPoint?
No, go back to the Teams window. Just find your Teams window. You should be able to see me in that window, and then top right corner share.
Right, I got it. I think we're here.
All right, go full screen. There you go. All right.
Did I lose it again?
You lost it again.
Ah. Hold on. Hold on.
It's fine, no problem. Folks, we have the feedback form in the chat. If you want to give us feedback, the CU form is also in the chat. If for any reason you cannot see the CU link or the feedback form link, pop me a message in the chat and I'll repost them. And you're getting back, Hank. Okay, you're going full screen.
Okay. So this is this is the critical general conclusion here. I'm sorry about that. If there are no derived relations, then the question we need to ask is, are theories of derived relations necessary? Now, I mentioned there might be some clinical implications. Echoic, tact, textual, and intraverbal behaviors can serve as acquisition targets for people who do not respond effectively to verbal stimuli. So if you're trying to teach equivalence relations based on a mediational theory, you should teach the verbal components of those relations. Teach echoic behavior, teach tacting behavior, teach intraverbal behavior. An echoic repertoire seems necessary for effective listening. So if you're working with kids and you want to do equivalence, then the first step seems to be an early assessment of echoic behavior, and then teach echoic behavior if you can. Similar recommendations are appropriate for individuals who use, signs or other devices for communication. So suppose you say to a kid who signs, point to the horse. Well, what you should probably do is get them to echo that with their sign. I'm not sure what the correct word for that would be, but we'll call it echo. So they sign horse, and they continue to sign horse while they're scanning the array. Right? That would be the equivalent of a person with an echoic repertoire saying horse and then self-echoing it while they scan the array. Before I say thank you, you can follow me on Instagram by scanning this. I have also done several podcasts on different topics. I believe if you scan that QR code, you have access to a page which lists some of the podcasts. And then I have 2 books which are available on Amazon.com. The first one, How to Build Good Behavior and Self-Esteem in Children, which is a parenting book or a staff training book, and a behavior analytic view of child development. And Thanos, I was going to tell you that this is now available in a much cheaper version on Amazon.com with a new cover, but it's the same book inside. And with that,
and I've got the older one. Let me plug that one just in case people find that one online as well. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, this one's much cheaper though. That's the issue.
All right.
With that, I would like to thank you guys for your attention. Sorry I went over a few minutes, and I want to thank Thanos for inviting me to give this talk to you today. Anybody have any questions, I'm willing to stick around and answer them, or you can email me, and I'm happy to communicate with you on email.
Thank you, Hank. That was really enlightening. We have some people who are thanking you. Folks, if you have questions, by all means, please type away and I can read them aloud to Hank for you. Someone says you forgot to promote your music as well. I think the background is kind of suggesting there is music going on in Hank's life with all those guitars in the background. So yes. Cormac, I'm not sure he forgot. I think he's being subtle about it.
Yes, you can find my album on Spotify if you're interested.
Oh, I didn't know that one. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Let me check. Have I got any questions, folks? I know that sometimes people need a while to type away. People are saying thank you, great presentation, fantastic.
Thank you.
Someone is asking mediation with SGD users. I don't know what SGD stands for. Could you clarify? People are saying so interesting, thought-provoking. How does the mediational theory explain reflexivity? Is one question. Hank?
Well, you know, I only gave very simple 3-member equivalence classes. And so one of our points in the paper is that if a 3-member equivalence class, if symmetry and transitivity can be explained through mediation, then anything more complex can be explained, right? If the simple thing is explained parsimoniously that way, then more complex arrangements can be explained in the same way. And reflexivity seems to be the simplest to explain. I mean, that's just matching red to red, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that mediation is actually required for that. But let's talk about, for example, a delayed matching to sample. Okay, so in a 0-second matching to sample, let's say with pigeon, so you put the sample red and then you have a sample comparison red and green. You teach them to match red to red. Pigeons don't have a very difficult time doing that. They learn that pretty quickly. If you impose a delay between the sample and the comparison, the matching performance breaks down immediately, even if it's only a 2 or 3 second delay. And then it takes really hundreds of trials to get them at like 80% accurate on a delayed matching to sample. So why does it take so long? And again, this is a question I think to ask in a lot of relational frame studies or matching to sample studies. Why does it take, in many of those studies, why does it take hundreds of trials before you are able to show any kind of derived relations? And the question that raises for me is, what's going on in all those trials? And what researchers have shown with pigeons and delayed matching to sample is that mediating behavior in the pigeons is being gradually shaped up. And it's all idiosyncratic. So each pigeon engages in idiosyncratic behavior because they're always doing something during the delay, right? So when the comparison stimulus comes up 2 seconds later or 5 seconds later, and they're reinforced for pecking the correct comparison stimulus, they've been doing something during the delay, something completely accidental. But that something gets reinforced. It's a little bit like Skinner's superstition experiment, right? Where after, a couple of hours on a 15-second, fixed time schedule, many of the pigeons engage in ritualistic behavior during that 15-second, delay. So I'm not sure that a mediational theory is as relevant in reflexivity as it is in symmetry or transitivity, but I wouldn't rule it out. I'm not sure what the mediating responding would be.
Another question says, how does what about mediation with people who use speech generating devices? That was what SGD stands for.
Oh, I see. Yes. Well, if you go back to my last example of teaching someone to point to the horse, and so let's say that you teach them, you say point to the horse, and they have a speech generating device, and they're able to touch the picture of a horse. And when they do so, it says horse, right? So it's either the picture of the word or it doesn't matter. So they touch it, it says horse. They keep touching it, right? While they're scanning the array. And when they see the horse and they select it, they're reinforced for selecting the horse, the picture of the horse or the word, whatever, at the same time that they hear horse while they're selecting it on the speech generating device. So that would be akin to engaging in self-echoic behavior if you have speech, or continuing to sign horse throughout that delay while you're scanning the array if you're a signer. So I think that would be the way that I would think about doing it.
Okay, thank you, Hank. Someone is asking if you can point them to any direct research suggesting mediation/the echoic process. Hank, are you happy to send me your slides and I can share them as a PDF with the CEU? That way people can see the citations, because I know you had plenty in there that I assume link to some of these things, or
yes, I can. I can do that, and I can also send you a separate file of references of our manuscript, which has been accepted.
That's brilliant. And I suppose in that QR code, maybe if you put back the QR code, to go to the slide with your QR codes, I assume people will find some bits there as well, right? That website, Build Good Behavior, for example, would that have some of the references that link to that?
No, that doesn't have them.
Okay.
No, I'll have to send them to you.
Cool, that's fine. I can share the paper with folks when I send around the CEU.
Okay.
Another question says, do the RFT people pay any attention to these suggestions? What has been the have you had any thoughts from the RFT folks about this theory? Although I suppose because it's just been published, I don't know if people have had a chance to really read the paper yet. But
right. Well, it hasn't even been published yet. It's just been accepted. So it'll be
accepted.
It'll be published. I don't know when. Hopefully, sometime in the end of the summer or the fall. I don't know. I expect some pushback. We expect some pushback. We expect it'll be controversial, despite the fact that we have cited really dozens of other references, both with humans and non-humans, that are already there. I mean, it's what we're proposing is not new. We're just taking it to the next step. It's really an extension of the Horn and Lowe hypothesis. Their hypothesis, I think, was mostly with an auditory sample. So they mostly focused on echoic behavior. We're just taking it to the next step and bringing in research with non-humans, which also shows that mediating behavior facilitates matching to sample performance. So I expect there will be pushback because, as I said, if it's true that so-called derived relations are not really derived, that they're all mediated, then what does that say about theories of derived relations? And I think that's the part that will cause the most controversy and pushback from the RFT folks, which we expect. We expect we'll get some of that.
What happens when you have learners that do not show any of these skills? For example, you may have a learner that does not learn these relations through internal tacting or echoing. Is there research that shows that enhancing a person's echoic repertoire could enhance the learning of symmetry?
There is some, yes. And there's some research that's a little equivocal on that, but I think the problem is, again, with this notion of defined versus undefined responses. Because if an individual is engaging in subaudible echoic or self-echoic or interverbal behavior, you can't, obviously, that's not observed. There's no way to observe and measure that. I think, for us, there's a logical position on this, and the logical position is, can you demonstrate equivalence in nonverbal organisms? Can you demonstrate equivalence in non-verbal humans? There's almost no research reporting that at all. So that suggests there's something about being verbal. Now, it is true that they have demonstrated equivalence or reported equivalence in non-verbal organisms, but the procedures to do that are very idiosyncratic. It's not just your basic matched sample like they do with verbal humans. They have to really go to a lot of extremes to find what looks like equivalence in non-humans. So I think for us, the implication is teach some mediating behavior. If a kid is vocal, if you can teach echoic, for me, echoic responding is the most critical verbal operant that there is. Because if you can't echo, then you're not going to be able to learn words. You're not going to shape every single word, right? You can't learn all the words you need to learn, the text, the text, which you can't learn them if you can't echo. Also, echoing is involved in listening to what other people say. It's involved in remembering what other people, what someone tells you or what you need to do. It's involved in problem solving. But if a kid is non-vocal, then you have to go with other avenues, right? So either a speech generating device or signing or some other way that they can engage in behavior that mediates the relations that you want to teach. And that's up to the creativity of the practitioner, and the demands of the child or the person that you're working with. It doesn't have to be verbal, but our argument is that verbal or not, these relations will not occur unless there's some mediating behavior that's directly trained.
Thank you, Hank. Another question says, do you think the mediation theory accounts for the Stroop effect? If I'm reading it right, Stroop it's S-T-R-O-O-P. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, the Stroop effect. The Stroop effect is very very interesting and in my view somewhat overblown in psychology. The Stroop effect is if you show people pictures of colors, different colors, they can tell you what the color is, right? So if you show them green, blue, red, they say green, blue, red. But if you show them words that are printed in those colors, then they have a tendency to say the word and not the color, right? I have a slide from my intro psych class that shows this. So you can show them the word red, but if the word red is printed in blue ink and you ask them, well, what's the color? They have a tendency to say red and not blue because the word is red. I don't know that I would say that mediating behavior is involved in that. I think, we're all taught to read words. We're never taught to say the color of the word, that it's the color of the printed word, right? But you could teach someone to do that, and it's not difficult for us, right? And once you figure out what you have to do, you know, you can look at a printed word and you can say what the color of the word is rather than what the actual word is, right? Once you know what that's what you have to do. But in the beginning, it's a little hard because you have a tendency to read words, not to say the color of the word. So I right now, I can't think of how mediating behavior would be involved in that. It just seems like, you know, you've already got an established repertoire of reading words, saying what the word is. And now someone tells you to say the color of the word and you're like, oh, that's red. Oh, no, I'm sorry, blue, you know. So I don't know if that answers
I've
the
got
question.
I've got a feeling it's the other way around when young ones are taught colors but have not been taught to read yet. Am I
Yes.
correct?
Oh,
Which
yeah,
then
I'm sure.
suggests it's just a matter of a learning history. And I really like
Exactly.
the very parsimonious answer to that. Okay. What about how will this new perspective influence the practice that you see in therapies for mental health, such as acceptance and commitment therapy or process-based behavioral therapy? Any thoughts on that, Hank?
I'm not really an expert on those, but the only thing I will say is this, and this is probably consistent with most psychotherapies. Our pets do not have depression or anxiety or fears or any of those things. It's only verbal humans that are depressed and anxious. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, where does that depression and anxiety mostly come from? And I think the answer is it mostly comes from our self-talk. We talk to ourselves all the time. Like I tell my students, like, what are you anxious about? Well, I'm anxious about the test we have tomorrow. And I say to them, yes, but the test is not here. The test is not in front of you. So what are you actually doing? And the answer is they're talking to themselves about what might happen tomorrow, right? So they're talking, oh, I got a big test. Oh my God, I haven't studied for the test. What if I flunk? I'll flunk the class. Oh my God, if I flunk the class, I'll lose my scholarship. Well, that's where your anxiety is, right? It's not the test. The test is not real. Oh, I'm anxious about the Israel-Gaza war. But you see, the Israel-Gaza war is over there. It's not with you. It's not in your environment. You're only anxious because you're talking to yourself about it. So I think rather than just a mediational analysis or theory, it's mostly how our self-talk affects our physiological functioning, our emotions, and our behavior as well. You know, we all would like to just have that 10 or 15 seconds of pure silence, right, where we don't talk to ourselves. Some people go for meditation so that they can just stop that internal dialogue. It's really it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to stop that internal dialogue, right? So I'm not sure, again, whether a specific mediational theory is as important as simply a theory of how our self-talk is responsible for our psychological distress when we experience that. And I have a feeling that ACT and CBT and other forms of behavior cognitive-based psychotherapies work by tackling that self-talk, which generates, you know, the bad feelings of the anxious feelings with the depression and all that kind of stuff. So that's my best answer that I can give, I think.
Okay. And with that one, I thank you all for attending today, and we will upload this to our YouTube channel if you want to revisit it, and I will send you the CEU forms. As I said, I've got 45 days. I will also include the paper from Hank and his slides and everything. I'll try and share as much as I can about this because I can see there's a lot of interest. Hank, thank you ever so much for giving us your precious time today, and hopefully we'll have you back in the future to talk more about this line of research or other lines of research that you're pursuing. Thank you again. Thank you all.
It would be great. Thank you, Thanos. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye-bye.